Hi, and welcome back to Reflect Forward. I'm your host, Carrie Siggins, and I am so glad you are here today. Today, I am interviewing Bob Glazer. He is awesome. He is the founder and chairman of the board of Acceleration Partners, which is a global partner marketing agency. He's been the recipient of numerous industry and company culture awards, including Glassdoor's Employee Choice Awards 2 years in a row. He is the author of the inspirational newsletter Friday Forward, which, if you have not subscribed to it, I highly recommend you do so, and is the #1 Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and international bestselling author of 5 books. His latest one, Elevate. Other ones include Friday Forward, How to Thrive in the Virtual Workplace, Moving to Outcomes, and Performance Partnerships. He is a sought after speaker by companies and organizations around the world and is the host of the Elevate podcast, which I'll be on later this year. He's awesome. I know you're going to have so much fun. My friend Chris Shembra introduced me to him, and I'm so glad he did. Bob and I share so many of the same philosophies. In fact, he's even in my book, The Ownership Mindset, coming out here in October. Before I met him, I read an article that he wrote about mindful transitions, which we talk about in the episode and I talk about in my book. And I was thrilled when I had an opportunity to meet him because I love his thoughts on mindful transitions. So make sure you listen to the whole episode so you can learn what that means, because it's a pretty great tool to have in the workplace. All right, with that, I will be right back with Bob. All right, everyone, I am back with the one and only Bob Glazer. Well, I don't know, maybe you're not a one and only, but you're the one and only I know, and
I
you're the
think there
one
are
and
more.
only. Thanks for joining me on the show
There's a
today.
Rob Glazer who's got a Malcolm Glazer, got a lot of money. But yeah,
That's not you. You're not Rob, you're
not
Bob.
me. No, exactly.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So you are the founder and chairman of your amazing marketing agency. So do you want to talk a little bit about Acceleration Partners and what you do, why you started the
Yeah,
company?
I would say we're a little bit of a big fish in a small pond. We kind of really specialize in this area called affiliate and partner marketing. And like most people who run an agency, I did not start it intentionally. Someone asked me like, "How did you decide to start your agency?" And I thought about it and I laughed on the interview. I'm like, "What's so funny?" I was like, I have a lot of friends that started agencies, sold agencies, so forth, and none of them did it on purpose. Like they just started doing something and then they got full and then they hired another person and then they woke up and they were starting an agency. I've met one person who actually intentionally started an agency. So yeah, we help companies set up partner programs or affiliate programs where they recruit a bunch of people who work on behalf of marketing their brand. They use their Instagram or their blog or their newsletter or whatever thing, and they get paid on a performance basis. So rather than a click or impression, they get paid when something works. So companies really love these programs and they're kind of enabled by technology because they can pay for their marketing after they get the sale. But it's not as easy to scale. So we help a lot of like Fortune 500 global companies kind of build and manage these programs. And a lot of them are global.
And is that what you did before you started this agency? Like, how did you get into building out affiliated
N-
marketing programs?
No. So I always liked working with growth oriented companies and a lot of consumer companies. I was actually working at a physical business that built centers for kind of new and expecting parents before this. And that's when I sort of learned around life cycle spaces like baby and wedding and consumer. And at the end of the day, if you're building a consumer business, you have to have a good product or service, but it kind of becomes, can you get customers cost effectively? That is the name of the game. And when I started diving into the different ways to get customers, I kind of fell into this affiliate and partner space and it was being used by a lot of people in a pretty shady, kind of underhanded way. But I was like, oh, this is really interesting. Like, how can this be done in more of a blue chip way? And I ended up partnering with a company at the time called Tiny Prints, which did like the first high end, like photo paper birth announcements. And we kind of set up a lot of these partnerships with mom bloggers and otherwise. And it was hugely successful. They sold to Shutterfly for a ton of money. And a lot of people that we worked with on that program went, as they do in the Valley, they went to other companies and then they called and said, you help us build that program. And I was doing a bunch of different things at the time. And again, I did one of them, then I hired someone to help me with the second one. And then there was four of them. And then we need another person. And then you wake up and you're running an agency. So that was the genesis.
That's awesome. Well, that's an interesting story. And you're also a culture junkie like me. I don't know if that's a proper way to call it, but you've written
And
6 books on this
that's
stuff. And so where did, this love for culture and building teams and, building companies with being mindful of cultures come from?
yeah. I mean, it was really selfishly motivated. I'm sure you can resonate with this. And then when I say like, I worked in a bunch of these companies. I didn't like
Yeah.
them. I worked around these high growth companies. I loved, I thought when I started Acceleration Partners that I would pick one of these 5 companies that I was building these things for and just want to work with them and go down because that's what I had done. But I realized like, as much as I loved being around the work, the cultures of these companies sucked
Mhm.
pretty much and were horrible. And so as my organization started to grow, I was like, all right, I'm someone who's not like the ends justify the means. Like we wanted to enjoy the journey. And so I was like, how do we be high growth, but not do all of these things that some of our clients at the time did, or that I see in these other high growth companies and not sort of be this. And so I started becoming very intentional around if I'm going to build this company, what is the company that I want to actually work at? And I got to keep answering that question every time it grows and it doubles. And so that just became sort of one of our North Stars around like, what's a place that we would want to work at? And one of the things in my presentation, I tell people like, hey, you'd be proud for your kids to work at or your grandkids to work. That doesn't mean that every day is fun
Mhm.
or it's not hard or the clients aren't difficult, but do you treat people well? Do you treat them with respect? Is it a place that helps people grow? I mean, one of the things I'm most proud of, including our new CEO, I think 80 to 90% of our senior leaders have really come from within and grown up. And some of them, we have stories of they responded to a Craigslist ad years ago for a copywriting job, and
Yeah.
now they manage 100 people on our team.
It's amazing. I agree with you completely. And how would you define your culture, right? People ask me this all the time, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, and
Yeah.
I have it all written down now. But what does a great
Yeah.
culture look like to you?
I can answer that in so many ways. So first is that I think we tend to think they're ostensibly good and bad cultures. I don't believe that that's the case. There are some things that we would agree that make up good and bad cultures, like screaming at people, making them feel horrible versus treating them well, paying them fairly. There's some quality. But to me, a culture is a little bit, and I see this because I'm in the second phase of a junior in high school looking at university. It's a little bit like a college. Like it has a value proposition. It's very different. Like the big city school can be very different from the liberal arts school. And it's trying to offer that value proposition and find someone who wants that value proposition, right? If you're someone who really wants a liberal arts rural school and ends up going to a huge, city school down south, like you're probably not going to like it. The actual reason that just doesn't align to what you want. So to me, like the essence of a great culture is people and what they think, what they say, what they do are in alignment. And I think that can be very different. You could have cultures that record growth and innovation and things like that. And someone would like that. And you can have one that just rewards being around and longevity, consistency, and there's very little innovation or otherwise. So I think great cultures, the framework I've always used is they have 3 things and 2 modifiers. So they have a clear vision of where they want to go. They have real values, not kind of the wall art, but real values. And then they have goals and targets. And you think about those from left and right. They have a vision and they're trying to get to goals and targets. And they get there by going through their values, not around it. And then the modifiers are clarity and consistency. I think what people want from a company is they want clear values, clear vision, clear goals and targets. And they want, consistent vision, consistent value, consistent goals and targets. So I think we're a great company for like 2% of the population or less based on my experience. So our job is to find those people.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I remember early on my career as a CEO, and I was, like thinking about intentionally building culture. And when someone wasn't a fit, or when someone was said, "Oh, I hate working there," I could take it personally. And I was like, "Oh, well, we're such a good company." And what I realized as I've matured is that you're spot on. Right. It's only going to work for people who are looking for those things. And we're an employee
Yeah.
owned company, and our culture is really focused around this whole idea of own it and the ownership mindset and what it means to think and act like an owner. And a lot of people don't
Right.
want
And if
that
you have ownership,
responsibility.
if you're owning a core value and no one has actual
Yeah.
ownership. So this is why all these companies are struggling with remote work right now. They're not willing to set a policy or put a line in the sand. They're trying to appease everyone. Maybe you can do like in some ways, I don't agree with the investment banks, but I think that, hey, we're all coming to work or you're fired. At least that's clear. A lot of this hybrid stuff is being a mess because people are just so afraid to have someone be upset and not like it versus say, look, we're coming to the office on Tuesday or Wednesday. If you're someone who wants to work from home, not connect with your employees and never come in, that's not the type of company we
Yep.
want to build. Like you can choose,
Yep.
like you have a choice on that. We have a choice.
I think you're right. And I do think that so many employers are fearful of losing people because of the tight labor market. And so you're right. They're trying
Yeah.
to like
So they
figure out
frustrate
that
everyone.
line exactly to say, okay, but it's a huge problem losing that disconnect. I just had a company meeting this morning and we were talking about one of our values, which is be a great teammate and the whole relationship building aspect of it and how important it is to make intentional effort to build a relationship with your coworker. And that is your responsibility, especially at Stone Age where
Right.
you have to think and act like an owner to be successful there. And some people really lean into that, but some people are like, oh, well, that's not what's important to me. I just want to get my work done. And it's being okay with saying, like, that's not what makes you successful here. That's not the kind of person we're looking for. We want relationship builders to work for us here. And
Yeah, and your
uh-huh,
values would resonate. I hear a lot of people say, "I just wanna work."
yeah,
I had a leader at a panel that people just wanna work on what they want, when they want, and how they want. I'm like, "Then they should probably go start their own
yeah.
company or go be a free agent
Mhm.
because that's not being part of it."
Nope. No, I agree. Well, you've done a lot of thinking and writing on this. Like, what other tips do you have for leaders who are struggling with this, who want workers back in the office, but have these hybrid situations that aren't necessarily effective for building relationships and building culture?
Yeah, look, figure out what's right for your business and explain the why to people. Look, we're seeing mostly, I think, the older, I'll say, males kind of playing the power
Mhm.
card of like, you have to be back in the office. To me, there's 100 ways you could go at
Yeah.
that from the business thing. Let's go back to the investment bank. Like, look, if we are pitching a $40 million client, that's a big part of our revenue. We are not going to do that on Zoom. That's not who we are,
Yep.
right? To me, that's a business orientation rather than you have to be in the office. Or so here are the things that be part of the office is part of our culture and part of our business. And there are also things that you can do that you don't have to be in the office. So I think more people need to explain
Yeah.
to employees, explain the why. Look, we've had a difficult discussion. And one of the difficult discussions I've heard a lot of companies have had to say to employees, like, why can't I work anywhere? I just want to work anywhere. Because it kind of breaks all kinds of state laws and federal laws, and it costs a ton of money. And our one HR person would be spending all day doing this and couldn't do anything else. So, like, we're not looking to tell you what you can't do, but this is sort of a reality and we need to operate inside of it. So, again, a lot of times people are giving people the rule, but without the
Yeah.
context. And I'm always like, look, assume positive intent, assume this person is just like you and they're a hardworking employee trying to make the best decision for the most people. But I think when we don't explain and we explain the rule without the context, or again, when we have to say to people, we never said you could work anywhere. We actually always had that. You can't move anywhere and you probably can't move to Russia. Like it's illegal. Can't work from Iran. These things came up. It's not because we want to set arbitrary rules. It's because here's the reality and the consequence of what it means and what it costs. And if you want to cover that, great. But this is what happens when we don't kind of explain the why and bring people into the
Yep.
discussion. I wrote a Friday for this a few weeks ago, but I really don't like when people hide behind they or the company
Yes.
or phrases like this or otherwise. Because again, those are people just like you trying to come up with a policy or do the best they can.
Yep, I agree. So how do you what do you recommend? I didn't read that Friday forward. What do you recommend for people who wanna hide behind that policy? Like, how should I take that
Uh,
that the
don't
forced stand that
don't
stance?
allow it
Yeah.
within your company. We had an offsite, and this was years ago, and someone who was very sort of passive aggressive on our team said, "Well, a lot of people have been the,
The
the
silent
facilitator, like
majority. Oh, so
yeah,
annoying.
the facilitator eviscerated the
Yeah,
person. We're not going. You're on the leadership team. We're not going to do
no,
this. Either express your opinion or tell us who said it or what it is, and we're going to sort of deal with it. I don't like dealing with unnamed
yeah,
forces, so I think it's like, but people also do this so that you can't argue with their argument or to sort of bolster their opinion. Well, everyone feels.
mhm,
I mean, how do you defend that? Or people say, I hear that everyone is leaving because of X. Right? So I think you need to sort of address those things head on. It's like, I'm happy to, like, if you're upset about something or whatever, happy to deal with your perspective, but either we're going to sort of name names here or we're not going to do this because it's sort of poor leadership. And this goes to, I've seen a lot of leaders of like sales teams, right? They let the sales team blame all sort of external forces for losing a deal. They have never lost a deal that was their fault, rather than being like, look, let's talk about what we did wrong.
Yeah.
Let's not talk about the competitor underpriced us. We got screwed. The client screwed us. Like, what did we do wrong? Because that's what we can learn from. Part of this is having a good and healthy culture is not la la kumbaya. We all get together. We like, there's some difficult in conversations in terms of maintaining the type of culture that we have a own a core value too. Like that requires some difficult conversations, like about when someone is not owning it.
Totally. We stopped doing anonymous surveys a couple of years ago. Because what it did is it caused more angst. As a leadership team, we want to take every comment seriously. Okay, what's that perspective? But it's easy to hide behind this. Well, lots of people feel this way. Or then you're just digging around trying to figure out, okay, who gave this feedback so that we can go in and figure out and go address it. And finally, we're like, that's not part of owning it, right? If you're going to think and act like an owner, you're going to be an owner in this company. You have to have the
Right.
courage.
That's
Yeah.
consistent with your
And so we
values.
cut it
Right.
out. And
And if it's not safe, then that's something you should
exactly,
be able to say
exactly.
publicly and embarrass everyone. Right.
Exactly, exactly. And so we said, okay, well, we're going to do this. Every single critical comment that we get or area for improvement, we're going to go talk to that person. We're going to take action so that we can show that courage was rewarded. And so that it
Yeah.
would encourage more people to actually say what they think. And it changed everything. It's been so much better since we've done that. But that whole hiding behind anonymous names or everybody, it's so destructive. So I really appreciate you bringing that up.
So, yeah, I have so many thoughts on that because we came to the same conclusion as we grew. Some companies have that, and you need that for issues of safety
Yep.
or harassment or
Yes, of
things where
course.
people feel like they are not being heard. There's a violation of power, and there has to be like a tip line, almost. But you have to have a good culture to be able to do this. But we have the same thing. We use a tool called Tiny Pulse, which you
Mhm.
probably may have used too. And it was great. We love getting all these things, but be careful of the vocal minority,
Mhm.
in the company that is a very loud 1% on something that talks like the issue is like you're remote and they're like, we should have offices. And you're like, 99 out of 100 people don't want an office. So maybe you need to get a job in an office rather than the whole company change. But what we couldn't tell after a while was, do we really have a problem or do we have one really loud person over and over again? And again, if we don't know what's going
Yeah.
on, fix
Right.
it. But you have to be a company that doesn't abuse the things. I posed this question on LinkedIn because it would always frustrate me. I actually paid people once in our town hall and Starbucks card to ask a really difficult question that I had to answer live and in person because I'm like, look, if you ask it, I'll answer it. That's part of the owning it. And they said, well, you're going to sell the company and like leave us high and dry. And I was like, awesome. That's great. Because I know everyone else is thinking that. So let's answer that. But when you get hide behind the question, what a lot of people do to our previous conversation is they ask questions with false premise. Like, again, why is everyone leaving here because they're being paid 30% more salary? And you're like, well, that is a gross generalization, right? And it was hard to not get defensive when I saw questions like that. Remember, managers or employees, they're people to do. Sometimes employees don't see.
Yep.
And if a company is respectful to people, they don't see the really bad things that have happened or poor judgment or things that employees have done where you're not trashing them or talking about it. But again, that person disappeared kind of quietly and everyone assumes there's some nefarious scandal going on. And I can't tell you that there was a sexual harassment
Yeah.
claim against. It's a very difficult situation. Again, it comes from assuming negative intent.
Totally agree. We battle with that too because we try to be as transparent as we can when somebody leaves the company. And obviously, there's some things that you can't say, and so we try keeping confidential things confidential and respect for
Right.
the person
It's really
leaving,
hard.
right? But being as honest as you can. But the thing that we've really worked on the other side of that is that nobody leaves the company with it being a surprise. Everybody is given a chance to
Yeah.
turn things around. It doesn't mean that people go on pips. I don't even really like pips. I mean, basically, you're gonna exit the company, although
It's doesn't work.
not a
Yeah.
yeah, I've had like
Well,
2.
we talked about this. The irony is they're done
Yes,
in the name of not getting sued, but what gets
totally.
you sued is people feel disrespected,
Exactly,
not that you
exactly.
got it.
Yeah, totally, totally. So I think our employees feel confident now that we've worked so hard to make sure that everybody knows that we work with everybody. If someone's struggling, unless it's like a gross negligence issue or something like that, where it's like, okay, you have to go. Everybody's given a chance to turn things around. And so I think that's where we've maybe taken some of that. I mean, it's always scary when someone gets fired, but that fear of, well, I didn't see that coming. So what if I'm next kind of
Yeah.
mentality that we go into as human beings and spiral. Everybody is given an opportunity to turn things around, that nobody's ever fired with it being a surprise. I mean, that's what we aim to create there. And so people know, well, at least he was given a chance or she was given a chance. And so that we've noticed that that really does help take some of that fear for, the people who are still working within the company.
Right, but I do understand that sometimes people do things or they have a
Totally.
illness and they ask not to talk about it. And
Exactly.
so you either trust your
Yep.
leaders or you don't.
Exactly.
I mean, we have had mostly good outcomes. Like you said, I've been a handful of real things that were surprises over 15 years, but I can tell you those were really bad fiduciary decisions, things that like we couldn't look the other way that had risk and like we had to deal with
Yep.
them. Like there wasn't a choice. But again, it's just, we're not going to trash the person on the way out. Like, so I always say to people, you either trust your leadership from their body of evidence, you don't. But again, they're people just like
Yeah.
you with the same information or whatever, trying to make a good decision and do that to the best of their ability.
Yep. I love that. Well,
There is no the company.
yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you. Well, how I first was introduced to you was reading an article that you wrote on mindful transitions. And so I think this is a timely place in the interview to talk about this. And I loved it. And I've totally adopted it and made it into to Stone Age. So taking this idea of pay to quit, and you don't have to give a 2-week notice, or you're not just going to get fired and not have any kind of a safety net behind you, which creates a lot of fear. And a lot of people do things because of fear, they stay stuck. And I really appreciated your thoughts on this. So, could you describe the theory behind mindful transitions and how you came up with it and how leaders can put it into practice in their own companies?
So it really came with an employee years ago. We kind of called Patient Zero, and Patient Zero was like the nicest guy. Everyone loved this person. They worked for our company. Um, they weren't doing well, and we went the typical route. Like, here's a PIP, and like a lot of PIPs, it gets better, and then it sort of starts troughing back down again because under fear of losing your job, you will generally temporarily improve whatever the behavior is. But then if the fundamental systemic things are not corrected, and sometimes they're incorrectable, I think it regresses. And so it started to slide right down again. And we were like, well, what do we do? And we are like, look, we talk about wanting to be a great culture and do things differently. And the thing is, a client service organization, account turnover is like the worst thing, like kind of surprise account turnover. So we were like, I don't know, why don't we have an honest discussion with this person and see what they want to do? It turns out they were just done with client services and wanted to do something different. We said, okay, well, what if we decide that you're going to leave? Like, you're going to go look for a job and we'll be okay with that. Like, you could interview and do this stuff and we'll monitor it. And look, we made some mistakes and some things we learned on. You should put kind of a definite timeline on this and stuff. But it actually like went really well. Person got a good job. We got to transition the account. We were like, God, this would be so much better if we weren't surprised by people. And I think these come both ways, right? They're conversations that the employees unwilling to have about what's not working, or the manager or the company is like, this isn't working. And then the employee's going to get blindsided when finally the manager kind of hits their wits end or whatever it is boils over. When you don't address it, then it ends up blowing up. It's like all the things you didn't say to your partner in a fight, and then you bring them up 6 months later, then it's unrecoverable. So we started trying to kind of make this into a thing. And it was kind of a mission. Like, how do we eliminate 2 weeks notice? And look, I heard these things about PIPs and I looked at PIPs. I'm like, I looked at the data, and there's a famous study on doctors, which you might have heard, where insurance company listened to conversations between doctors and their patients. And it actually wasn't the doctors who made the most mistakes that got sued. It was the people who sort of talked condescendingly to their
Mhm.
patients that had the most lawsuits, not the ones that had the most errors. And so I really felt like if you ask the lawyer, and look, I love lawyers, but sometimes their job is to be lawyers. They're going to say, you got to do a PIP because you're going to get sued. Well, there's no legal actual justification around that. And again, as I said before, people sue because they feel hurt or disrespected or otherwise. Putting them on a PIP that you want them to fail essentially is kind of counterproductive. So we started trying to say, look, blue pill, red pill, like we can do the PIP. our experience is it doesn't work. They don't last. 90% of people are in 9 months, or we can do this other thing. And eventually, like, here's how it works. We can support you. You can look for a job. Here's the timetable. And it gave us the freedom to start those discussions before we were kind of at wit's end. And it gave other people the freedom to come forward and have that discussion and know that we weren't going to walk them to the door. People still don't believe
I
it.
know.
Their parents tell them not to believe it. They've been damaged by so many other companies, and I get it. So then we start paying people a bonus for how much notice they gave us. Because to me, incentives sort of align behavior. And look, some people still won't get it. And it doesn't work perfectly all the time, but it's better than anything I found. Anyone has copied it and tried it has told me the same thing. They're like, God, that works so much better to have a real conversation. Here's also the irony with a manager, and this is psychological thing. Like, Carrie, you're on my team. I really like you. You're struggling. I know you're not going to work out. So what do? I start emotionally distancing myself from you because I need to make you into a bad person because I'm going to need to do a bad thing to you, which is the opposite that I should do, which is to lean into the relationship. Be like, Carrie, you and I both know you haven't made quota for 4 quarters in a row. You're struggling. This isn't working. What's going on? Is this what
Yeah.
you want to be doing? Inevitably, you're like, oh my God, like I've been dreading this conversation for 9 months. So always like, thank you. No one wants to suffer. And you say, look, like, how can we help? Can I do the reference? Can I do whatever? Do you want to start looking for a job? And I think the person's like super appreciative that again, you're not excusing the lack of performance, but the lack of performance is usually because someone's not doing the right thing that they're meant to do. But then you're leaning into the
Yep.
relationship at the same.
Yep. I totally agree with you. I just had a conversation with my VP of HR about this very thing. And we were talking about an employee who is
So
struggling.
hard to bring people into this who
I know,
yeah,
right?
not brought up in it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's like, because she was just like, she's new to the company. She's like, I have never been a part of anything like this. And I'm like, well, but if you just treat people like humans and you invest that time instead of trying to distance yourself, you lean into it. And it's like, look, I really care about you and I care about your happiness and I care about your success. And this isn't working. And so, let's talk about it. And this particular instance that we were talking about yesterday, it's moving a person who's not on the right seat on the bus. I think that this person is, we want her on the bus, just not on the right seat. But that person has to make the decision, right? Do I want to do this different role, especially if it's, considered a backward step? And my conversation was, I want you to do this. I think you can do this. I think you can be really successful in this role. But if it's not what you want, then that's okay. But let's agree that we'll talk through it together so that neither one of us are left in a bad spot with you saying, I'm giving 2 weeks notice and I quit, or me saying, this isn't going to work. And she was like, yes, I really appreciate that. And my new VP of HR is like, I cannot believe that
Yeah.
this is
People
how
really
you
like,
do
again,
this.
people are so trained.
I know.
It's so intuitive.
Yeah.
Like when you actually are like, what about this seems like
Yeah.
not the right thing
Yeah.
to do? But people are so trained. They're so trained in that
Yeah.
legal sort of
Yeah.
ease. And it doesn't make any sense. Would you rather pay someone like money to not work or get some value of you out of that time? And again, if you're in
No.
professional services, what clients absolutely hate
Mhm.
is fast account turnover. So
Totally.
what you do is you slot that
Yeah.
new person in on the account. They're there for 5, 6, 7 weeks. They start sending the reports. They start chiming in. And then at week 8, you're like, hey, Carrie's going to move
Yeah.
on. And at that point, it is like much less of
Yeah.
a shock to the
Yeah.
system. And because to lose the employee and then lose the client is particularly painful.
Yeah, definitely. Well, my VPH, she's like, I love this. This is so much better, even though it's just so different than any organization. But I agree with you completely. I just think that whole idea of helping people and just having real conversations, and not everybody can handle it. And you're right, not everybody believes it, but I've had so much success in helping people transition out because I want them to still speak well of the company, even if it didn't work. And you can't guarantee that with this idea of a mindful transition, but like, you can certainly increase the odds. Yeah, it didn't work out, but they took care of me. They really helped me. They allowed me to look for a job and gave me a
Small.
reference. Mhm.
It's a small world,
Yeah.
and these are your advocates. And by the way, the flip side's true too.
Yeah.
When you get 2 days notice or 1 week notice, people remember
Yes.
endings. And there are a lot of back channel references in this world. And the job market's harder than it was. And so if you burned your last 4 jobs, like people can go on LinkedIn, they can see me at work. I get back channel things all the time. And if what I remember is that person left me high and dry with almost no notice, I don't think the employee realizes in the moment how poor of a choice that might be for them. And it might not be poor today, but it might be poor 2 or 3 years down the
Yep.
road.
I live in a small town, and so anytime somebody has worked at Stone Age and is applying someplace else, I almost
Yeah.
always get a call. And I think employees who leave, like, pissed
They
off
don't
and
know,
angry, like,
right?
it's like,
And it's not the reference they were given, right? They were not given the person didn't provide your name. They just
called me.
looked it up, right?
Totally. They just call
Yeah.
me and say, "Hey, what about this person?" And so, yeah, I think it's very short-sighted of people to, go out, guns a-blazing.
But at the same time, I will say that if your company has a track record of walking everyone to the door the day that they
Yep,
leave, then you should be fully ready for that. You should
totally.
do it. Again, we say to our employees, look, if we ever break the trust of this, it's safe to have this
Yeah,
discussion. You could tell
yep,
everyone, you could go on Glassdoor and put it like it never happened. Just don't do that to people. But yeah, if your company walks people right to the door, then you don't want to do this. And you probably want to get your new job and do everything and then offer them 2 weeks notice and know you're leaving that
yep.
day. Like, because that's what they're going to do.
Yep, I totally agree. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate that article. I read it years before I actually got to have the opportunity to meet you. So I was really glad when your name came across my email. I was like, oh, yes, I've
Well,
been wanting to talk to him.
that's one I really like to see people freely copy. Like, I just think if more companies
Mhm.
did this, if we had better
Yeah.
leadership everywhere, we'd have better experience.
Well, you are in my new book. My book is launching, The Ownership Mindset. It launches in October. And I
Love
talk
it.
about this whole philosophy and that I took the idea from you. So you are in here, buddy.
And by the way, I'll give you a plug for that to what culture is. There are a lot of people I know, they go to their company. I want you to have an ownership mindset, right? But they have a salary, they have no
Yeah.
bonus. The owner makes all the profits. Why should they have an ownership
Yeah.
mindset? They're not interested in
Yeah.
making like, there's nothing compelling in that.
Yep. I know. I give a speech.
So don't read that book if you're not interested in actually making people
Exactly.
have ownership.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, I give a
Right.
speech pretty frequently based around a lot in my book called Turning Paycheck Players into High Performers. And it's a lot of this concept of how do you give autonomy and agency and treat people like adults and expect things from them and you get great results from it, even though you're not an employee owned company. And you see all kinds of eye opening things that people are like, oh, well, I can't be like that because I don't have this type of incentive or they don't even know how to use their incentives to create that ownership mindset. So I try to talk a lot about there's all kinds of things you can do as a leader to create this, even if you're not an employee owned company, because you're not an employee owned company, right? But you have it owning it as one of your values. And it's a really important aspect of how you expect people to show up. And so anyone can do it, but you have to want people to actually think and act like, oh,
Yeah. Our people have equity. A lot of our
yeah,
people have equity, but to me, it has to be some part of
yeah,
equation or some value in that, or just they can't see, or you're investing in them or what it is.
profit
It's just
sharing. There's
not.
all
Yeah.
kinds of things you can do. Yep.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah. Those are all different versions
Yep.
of the same thing.
Absolutely. All right. So let's talk about your new book, Elevate. So this is, I think, your sixth book. Is that correct that you have published?
It is.
Yes. Uh
Yes.
huh. Great. All right. So can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write it?
Yeah. So I talk a little bit about this in the open, but I sort of had this epiphany where I had written this book, Elevate, after a couple years and come up with this capacity building framework. And right at the same time, I was having some growth challenges in my business. And when I was kind of looking at those challenges, I realized, maybe this framework is sort of the same solution. And I think I talked about a bunch of different things over the years, but was able to really put that all together and think about how does this apply to did a lot with the capacity building on server. How do you build yourself as a leader or someone you're developing as a leader? And how do you put these same qualities into your team or into the organization? And I wrote the book probably almost 2 years ago. By the time you go through the process, had it come out 2 years ago, I don't think anyone would have listened or paid attention. We were in the high growth steroid era. And now I think it's a very different, interesting time. Growth is almost a bad word right now. Most people go to the team, like, we're going to grow 40% this year. They're like they're tired. We've come on all this kind of hyper growth, deflation, free money. And what they've seen is growth has been like this thing that where they're kind of drowning under the wave rather than riding on it. Look, we're going to get back to growth economy. Things are going to improve. I think they're already going in that direction. But I think it's going to need to look different. I think growth's going to have to kind of bring the employees along with it. My analogy is if NASA said that they were putting an astronaut on Mars and the vehicle landed on Mars and all the astronauts were dead, I don't think everyone would clap and celebrate on the news like they normally do, but that's sort of how companies have operated in this crazy growth. They're like, oh, we got to the goal, but we killed all the people along the way. And what's the point?
Right.
Right. Like that just seems like a hollow.
Yep, I totally agree. And do you think that business leaders are getting that? How do you think this shift is going to happen, especially with this short term outlook that so many, especially
Yeah.
publicly traded companies have?
I think they're going to have to
Hmm.
get because I think if you watched any of these corporate malfeasance series over the years, I think if you had one of these people right now, like an Adam Newmark, whatever, that went to their company, like, we're going to grow 100%, we're going to work 16 hours a day, we're going to beat everyone would be like, I'm out.
Yeah,
Like,
I don't
just,
care.
I,
Yes.
you just feel
Yeah.
like after 2 years of COVID and supply shocks and demand shocks,
Yeah.
like, people are just not interested in the super hustle grind
Yep.
right now.
Yep. Agreed.
I think they want not that they want to work. I think they need stuff that's meaningful, that they learn, that they grow. That just speed for speed's sake is not going to be as interesting to them. And look, here's the problem: we have a decade of a lot of leaders who I think don't know how to grow a profitable, sustainable business. All they know how to do is grow top line. That's what they've been trained on. That's what they've been rewarded on. I think people assume it's just a switch you can flip and they can suddenly do all the other stuff. I'm not sure that's true.
Yep.
Like those of us who have been building sustainable and profitable businesses for a long time feel like maybe our time has come.
Yep. I am so with you. Stone Age is growing just this good, steady growth, and we are incredibly profitable. And I care way more about that. We have this whole idea of the 24-mile march, which is our
Yeah. Yeah. I love
24%
that.
net income, right? We are going to make sure that we have that as our baseline minimum and that we always are doing that. And it doesn't have to be a whole lot higher because we want to reinvest in the company. Obviously, we're employee owned. So we want to pay people well, we want to reinvest, but that is a discipline of making sure that we are growing profits at the same rate that we're growing our top line. And people are like, oh, well, you've only grown to $100 million company instead of $500 million company. It's like, but why? For what? To ruin our culture?
During the Great Resignation,
Yep.
we heard a bunch of stuff from our employees. Given the segment that we were in, we're getting calls. We have great people offered 20 or 30% more money and promotions that sometimes they really didn't qualify
Yep.
for by a recruiter who was selling them something. And obviously, you start getting enough of these and you start kind of being like, oh, hey, we need to pay people more. We need 10% raises. There are the things going around Instagram. If you're not getting a 10% raise, you're losing money. We're like, look, we are open book. And you know that one of the values of our business, we have these long-term contracts with our clients. The other long thing of a long-term contract, we can't just jack it up on them. So like, here are our margins. Like if we go raise everything 10% across the board, we go from a healthy, profitable
Mhm.
company to being like really at risk, and we believe in having a reserve and cash flow ever. Fast forward a year later, everyone in our industry is doing huge layoffs, things that are a surprise, all this stuff. We're like, look, this is why we said this last year. This is why we played it conservatively and
Yep.
paid people what we could afford to pay them. Again, open book. You can see the margins, you can see the numbers. And now we have some cash in the bank and we're a little safer than these other organizations. And by the way, a lot of those people who took those jobs, I would say more than half weren't at them in 6 to 9 months later because the company didn't tell them they were 2 months from running out of money. They
Right.
didn't tell them, oh, you can work from home. Or we're just saying that now because people, and then we're going to tell you you can't work from home. I
Mhm.
think there were a lot of things in the sort of wooing process that were kind of overlooked. And so we always say, look, we're trying to hit doubles and triples. Sometimes if you swing for the home run, you can strike out. In 15 years, we never struck out. And so there's some safety in that, but that there are some trade-offs. It means not doing something sometimes just because you can. And we saved up for a rainy day and there's been a lot of
Yep.
rain.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's so smart. So smart. Well, it's going to be interesting to see how these next couple of years go. I share your optimism with things, continuing to get better, certainly across industries that we serve. So, yeah, it's interesting times. It's interesting times.
It's it's not look, no, obviously, like, talk to everyone. I wrote a thing that it sort of just feels sloggy because you're like, "How's it going?" And everyone's like, "Well, it's not horrible, but it's not
Yeah.
good." Right? That's
Yeah.
the sort of anyone in sort of marketing in our world or
Yeah.
e-commerce or growth, that's the general
Yep.
consensus that I have heard.
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely. Definitely. All right. Well, our time is up here. I do have one final question as my signature question. The name of
Yeah.
this podcast is Reflect Forward. So, what does Reflect Forward mean to you?
It's a great question. I was just my daughter was dealing with something, and I sent her the quote this morning that if you're depressed, you're living in the past. If you're anxious, you're living in the future. And then if you're something, you're living in the present, at peace, I think, in the present, which was an old school quote. So I think there's always points where it's helpful to like look back and reflect and sort of learn from it, but not get stuck or live there otherwise. It's like enjoy where you are, look forward, take the lessons of the past, but understand that those zones provide, I think, different things to us at different times. And I think if you can be way too stuck in the past and you can be way too much looking forward and miss the rock that's in front of you.
I love that. Fantastic. That's a great quote. I'm going to go find that.
I think I butchered it.
uh,
It's by some monk or priest or
all
someone like that
right.
that allows you or something like that.
I'm going to
You'll
find
find
it.
it.
Go find it. I'm going to put it in the show notes. Awesome. All right. Well, I'll include all your information about your website and your book in the show notes. It has been such a pleasure to finally get to interview you on my podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks,
All
Karen.
right. Hang tight, everybody. I'll be right back. All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that podcast episode with Bob Glazer. So much fun. Please be sure to check out his book, Elevate. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes& Noble, anywhere where you buy books. All right, with that, I will leave you to your day. I hope you have a fantastic one. And if you like this podcast, please share it with a friend, write a review, go rate it on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I really appreciate it. It helps with algorithms and spreads the word. And don't forget to pre-order my book, The Ownership Mindset. You can go to my website for all the links, carriesiggins.com, or you can go onto Amazon or Barnes& and Noble and search The Ownership Mindset, Carrie Siggins, and you'll find it. I really, really appreciate the support. Thank you so much. Have a fantastic day. We'll see you next week.